All right, welcome. Today we're going to practice some of the key vocabularies for geometry, okay? In geometry, we often will come across different points and planes and rays, and so we want to make sure we understand how to label each of these. And so for us, first we want to start off with the concept of a point. A point is a position, so we can call this A. This is called a point, and we name it or oftentimes describe it as point, and then name that point A. Sometimes we'll see the next one where if there are 2 points and there is like a line that kind of connects the two, but they don't go beyond the 2 points, we call this a segment. And let's call this BC. To name it, so this is to name it, and then this is what it is, right? Or to describe it, we call this segment BC. And often in mathematics, if they don't say the word segment in front of it, and even sometimes when they do, they often will draw a line over the alphabet letters just because it represents that this definitely has a start and an end. Okay. Next, if we have a point and it goes in one direction for infinity, we call this a ray, right? Think of it as like a sun's ray. We'll call this D, and we label it as ray D. And again, over the letter, you would see an arrow that points in one direction. If we have 2 points and it goes in both directions for infinity in a straight line there, we call this a line, of course. So a line. And we label it, let's call it EF. So this would be called line EF. Sorry, capital. And again, we would use double arrows. Now, interestingly enough, sometimes you will see a line and maybe there aren't points on the line. So maybe we see one like this. Okay, this is still called a line, but sometimes they might label it. So let's say usually a lowercase letter. So we'd call this a line M. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways that we can label or describe these terms, but definitely in geometry you want to have these memorized and understand what they are. If we have lines or rays or segments that cross at a point, this is called an intersection. Okay, and they intersect at a point. Also in geometry, we'll be working with kind of 2D and or 3D shapes. And usually with a 2D shape, we'll start off with something called a plane. This is called a plane. And usually they label it with like a cursive letter. We can call this, I guess, N, cursive N, right? So this would be called plane N. Okay. So let's take a look at an example together. If we were to label these, let's go ahead and just draw one. So if I were to draw a plane, let's go this way. And it doesn't have to be a rectangular plane, it can be any kind of plane. Let's say we draw a line that goes across. I'm going to call this AB. And then I'm going to have another line, and this time I'm just going to label this as N. If it intersects at a point, let's just call this point C. Okay, so notice how line N and AB, line AB crosses at C. Let's imagine then, I'm going to draw with a different color here. Let's do green. If I had a line that went down into B, so I kind of took out that B there. Let's call this C. And if that line went through that plane, so like it goes through it and beyond, we'll call this D. Okay. Oftentimes in math, not to be confused, they do a dotted line to show that it went through the paper. It's not actually there. Then they'll ask you some questions to see, do you understand the different concepts of lines, segments, rays, all that. So a question you might come across would be, name the intersection. So let's say name the intersection point of line CD and plane. Oh, we didn't give the plane a name, did we? Let's call this plane Z. Okay, plane Z. So what is the intersection point of line CD? So let's find CD. C is here, D is here. And notice it goes through this. And there's an intersection point, right? It goes through that point. So we'd have to name this as point, and I know it kind of got scratched off there, but it's point B. That's the intersection. Okay. It might ask you questions like, does the line, let's try N. So does the line N and line CD, okay, intersect? And so we might take a look at this, and we see CD is this green one here that went down, and line N is this one that went across, and it looks like it almost intersects at this point. But remember that line N is on the plane. It's on plane Z, so it's on this 2D plane, whereas line CD actually goes through the plane, and so it does not cross at that point. It looks like it almost does, but it doesn't. So does it cross or intersect? You would have to say no, and then explain, right? So no, line CD goes through the plane Z. It goes through the plane Z, okay? And line N is on the plane, okay? And we could even say it goes through plane Z at point B, right? So from the example above, it goes through point B, so it never goes or touches that line N. But that's kind of geometry. Just make sure you're reviewing these key terms and making sure you know how to draw or label them. That'll be really important as we get into higher levels of geometry.